For 10 years, Pastor Marcus Dawson prayed for his missing wife. Every night, he lit a candle. Every Sunday, he preached about faith, forgiveness, and waiting on God's timing. But then one ordinary afternoon, he saw something on the internet. A tourist photo from Mexico. There she was, smiling, alive, holding hands with a man half her age. She wasn't kidnapped. She wasn't dead. She had left him and their 2 children without a word. And when Marcus finally found her, he didn't call the police. He brought justice with his own hands. Asterisk. The summer of 2012 was supposed to be a reset. Pastor Marcus Dawson had spent the better part of the last decade leading a modest but devoted congregation in suburban Atlanta. He was a steady man, quiet, thoughtful, the kind of pastor who remembered the names of your grandkids and quoted scripture not to impress, but to comfort. Church folks often said his prayers could calm any storm. That July, Marcus decided it was time to take a rare break from the pulpit. He, his wife Allison, and their 2 children, Emma, 6, and Kyle, 4, packed up their SUV and headed south to the Florida Keys. A week of sunshine, seashells, and nothing but family. They checked into a cozy beachside cottage in Islamorada, one of those places with white shutters, faded porch swings, and the smell of salt baked into the wood. On the second morning, after pancakes and too much syrup, Allison kissed Marcus on the cheek and said she was going to take a short walk into town to grab a few things. She never came back. At first, Marcus didn't panic. It wasn't like her to be gone long, but maybe the store was busy. Maybe she ran into someone from the area. They used to vacation nearby before the kids were born. He played with Emma and Kyle on the beach, glancing up at the dunes every few minutes. An hour passed, then 2. By early afternoon, he was pacing. He asked the front desk at the rental office if they'd seen a woman matching her description. They hadn't. He called her phone, straight to voicemail. By sunset, Marcus stood barefoot in the sand, scanning the shore like a man trying to will the tide to bring his wife back. That night, he called 911. The Monroe County Sheriff's Office dispatched search teams. Dogs, drones, divers. Flyers with Allison's face, dark brown hair, hazel eyes, 5 feet 6 inches, last seen wearing a white sundress and flip-flops, were posted across the island. Local news ran segments. One anchor called her disappearance another heartbreaking mystery in paradise. But there were no signs of struggle, no personal items left behind, no suspicious footprints, no witnesses, and most haunting of all, no leads. Marcus, stoic as ever, told reporters, "I believe God knows where my wife is, and I believe she'll come back." Privately, he was unraveling. He didn't eat for 3 days. Slept with her pillow clutched to his chest in the empty bed. When the authorities asked if their marriage was strained, Marcus just blinked slowly and said, "I married her in front of God. She's my covenant, not my convenience." He stayed in Florida for another week after the official search ended, handing out flyers on boardwalks and knocking on doors. Eventually, with no new information and 2 young children to care for, he returned to Georgia. But nothing felt the same. Back home, Marcus stood behind his pulpit for the first Sunday service since the disappearance. The sanctuary was quiet, packed with familiar faces holding their breath. He looked out over the pews, Bible in hand, voice trembling just slightly as he opened with the book of Job. "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him." People wept, and for a time, so did he. The weeks turned into months. The prayers kept coming. The casseroles, the babysitting offers, the envelopes slipped under his door. His church held vigils. Emma asked almost daily, "When's Mommy coming home?" Marcus would smile, rub her back, and say the same thing every time. "We're waiting on God's answer, baby." And God's never late. But when he was alone, truly alone, he stared into the corners of his home like something might speak from the silence. He wandered the hallways late at night, whispering her name over and over again. Allison's side of the closet remained untouched. Her Bible stayed on the nightstand. Her favorite coffee mug, chipped at the handle, sat by the sink clean and used. In the months that followed, rumors swirled. Some thought maybe she drowned. Others speculated abduction. A few whispered darker possibilities, but no one dared say them aloud near the church. Not to Pastor Dawson. Not to the man who still showed up every Sunday and preached forgiveness with a shaking voice. 3 years later, the case was quietly labeled inactive. Allison was legally presumed dead, but Marcus never signed the paperwork. Marcus Dawson didn't stop preaching. That was never an option. Even after the church elders gently offered him a sabbatical. Even after well-meaning friends suggested he take time to heal. Marcus simply shook his head and returned to the pulpit. Every Sunday, he told himself that if he kept serving others, kept speaking the word, maybe, just maybe, the silence inside him would stop screaming. But it didn't. His home, once filled with laughter and hymnals playing in the kitchen, now sounded hollow. The mornings were the hardest. The smell of coffee without her beside him. The silence in the bathroom where her blow dryer used to hum. The way Kyle still reached for her hand sometimes, forgetting she wasn't there. Marcus learned how to braid Emma's hair. He packed school lunches with post-it notes of scripture tucked inside. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted. It was all he could offer. He tried not to let the congregation see how weary he was. But some Sundays, his voice would catch in the middle of a sermon, and he'd pretend it was a cough. Other days, he'd lose his place reading from the gospel and simply close the Bible, saying, "The Lord knows what's written, even if I don't have the strength to read it today." No one judged him. If anything, they admired him more. The single father, the faithful shepherd, the grieving husband who never once questioned God, at least not out loud. But behind closed doors, Marcus had questions no prayer could answer. Why had Allison left that morning without her phone? Why were there no security camera sightings? Why did no one on that island remember seeing her? And why, after all these years, did he still feel like something wasn't right? As time crawled on, those questions dulled, but they never disappeared. Year after year, Marcus lit a candle on the anniversary of her disappearance. Not in the sanctuary, just in the quiet of their bedroom. He'd place it beside her photo, the one taken at their 10-year vow renewal, her in a soft pink dress, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. "Where are you, Allison?" he'd whisper. No answer ever came. Emma grew into a thoughtful, creative young woman. She wrote poems, played piano, and asked deep questions about justice, faith, and loss. Kyle, always more reserved, turned to sports and silence. He never spoke about his mother. Not once. But every night before bed, he placed her picture on the floor next to his pillow. Like a shield, like a wound. Marcus raised them as best he could. He taught them kindness and scripture, discipline and mercy. He was at every game, every parent-teacher conference. He made them breakfast on Saturdays, even if he didn't eat much himself. But deep down, he felt like a ghost in his own home. Moving, breathing, serving, but never quite alive. By year 5, most people stopped asking. New members of the church didn't even know he was a widower, only that he was steady, serious, and deeply committed. The older members tiptoed around the subject, as if saying her name might break him open. But Marcus never forgot. He kept a locked box in his closet. Inside, her hairbrush, her wedding ring, a pressed flower from their honeymoon, and the last voicemail she ever left him. "Hey babe, we're out of milk. I'll grab some on my way back. Love you." 12 seconds. That was all. He played it once a week. Not to hear her voice, but to remind himself that it had existed. That she had existed. And yet, as the 10th anniversary of her disappearance approached, something in Marcus began to shift. Not quite hope. Not quite despair. Something colder. Sharper. It started with a dream. He saw her on a beach, barefoot, laughing with someone else. Not him. Another man. Younger. Taller. Holding her waist like he'd always belonged there. When Marcus woke up, the sheets were soaked with sweat. He told himself it was just his mind playing tricks, tired of carrying so much silence. But the image stayed, like a thorn in his ribs. He began to rewatch the old news segments from the Florida search. He opened her file again. He reread the police reports, this time not as a husband, but as a man hunting for inconsistencies. He didn't know what he was looking for, but something deep inside told him. After 10 years of preaching grace and waiting on miracles, it was finally time to stop praying and start looking. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late June. Georgia was thick with heat, the kind that made the air feel heavy even in the shade. Emma had just returned home from her summer internship at the library, still wearing her name tag, her hair pulled into a messy bun. Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table, a Bible open but unread, his glasses resting on the page like a bookmark he hadn't moved in hours. "Dad," Emma called softly, sliding her phone across the table, screen glowing. Marcus looked up. "I saw this online today, and I know it's probably nothing," she said. "But doesn't that look like Mom?" He stared at the screen. It was a tourist photo, one of those candid snapshots taken by a boat crew and posted to Instagram. The account belonged to a small eco-tourism company in Cancun, Mexico. A man and a woman were standing on a paddleboard in clear blue water, laughing. Their skins sun-kissed, wind in their hair, drinks in hand. And the woman had Allison's smile. Marcus leaned in. His breath caught. She was tanner. Her hair was lighter, pulled back into a ponytail. But the eyes, the way she tilted her head when she laughed, he knew that look. He'd memorized it across 15 years of marriage. He'd buried it in his sermons. He'd prayed to it every night. And now it was staring back at him from a stranger's vacation reel. Emma was still talking, but her voice sounded far away. Something about, maybe it's just someone who looks like her, and I didn't want to upset you. But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. The world had narrowed to the image on that screen. "Where did you find this?" he finally asked. Emma pointed to the account. "It's a small adventure tour group. I was researching travel ideas for a school project. That photo popped up in their tag posts. I just thought you should see it." Marcus nodded slowly. "Thank you." He handed the phone back. Emma lingered, watching him for a reaction, but there was none. Just that slow, blank pastor face, the one he used at funerals when the grief was too fresh to name. She left the room in silence. That night, Marcus sat in his study long after the kids had gone to bed. The desk lamp cast a soft yellow light on his laptop, where the photo was now full screen. He'd pulled it from the Instagram page before it was lost to an algorithm. He enlarged her face, pixel by pixel, the jawline, the collarbone, a small scar just below her neck. He remembered it from a bike accident when they were dating. She used to hate it, used to cover it with necklaces. But here it was exposed, free. That wasn't just a woman who looked like Allison. That was Allison, alive, laughing, with someone else. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He started digging. The Instagram account belonged to a tour group called Sea Vibe Adventures. Their posts were frequent, casual, tagged with hashtags like #ParadiseVibes and #LiveFree. The man in the photo appeared in several other shots. A muscular, tan-skinned man in his early 30s, with longish hair and a sleeve of tattoos. Always shirtless, always grinning, always close to Allison, sometimes with his arm around her waist, sometimes with his mouth near her ear. In one caption, he called her Aria. Marcus froze. Aria? She had a new name, and that name led him to more. A Facebook account, a restaurant page, a travel blog with sun-drenched photos of food, beaches, and love notes signed. D&A. Diego and Aria. She had an entire life. She was running a beachside cafe with her partner, Diego Ramirez, in Cancun. They posted about yoga retreats, salsa nights, organic smoothies, and sunset boat rides. The kind of lifestyle magazines called Bohemian Bliss. And in none of it, nowhere, was there a mention of a husband in Georgia, or children, or a past. Marcus leaned back in his chair, breath shallow. She wasn't missing. She never had been. She had walked away from him, from their children, their church, their life, and created a new identity, complete with sunshine, strangers, and a man who could have been her son. The realization didn't come with a scream. It came like a whisper down the back of his neck. Cold, hollow. She had been living freely while he had been standing over a pulpit, preaching forgiveness through cracked lips. While he was raising their children to believe in redemption, she was sipping piña coladas and posting about living in the now. Marcus turned off the lamp. He sat in darkness. And for the first time in 10 years, he didn't pray. Not a word. Because in that moment, something inside him changed. Not just the grief. Not just the betrayal. Something deeper. Something older. A silence that didn't want peace anymore. It wanted answers. In the days that followed, Pastor Marcus Dawson went about his life as if nothing had changed. He gave Sunday sermons. He led prayer meetings. He counseled grieving widows and comforted young couples preparing for marriage. He smiled. He nodded. He quoted scripture. But inside, something had broken loose. The image of Allison laughing in the arms of another man haunted every quiet second. He saw her behind his eyelids when he prayed. He heard her laughter in the spaces between verses. She was no longer a memory trapped in a frame on the dresser. She was alive, moving freely in a world where Marcus no longer existed. She had erased him, and not just him. There were no mentions of Emma, no birthday photos, no references to Kyle's first baseball game, no grief, no guilt, not even a whisper of her former life. Marcus watched one of Diego's Instagram stories late one night. It was grainy and loud, shot in a beach bar. Aria, Allison, danced barefoot under colored lights, holding a cocktail, her head tilted back in laughter as Diego whispered something in her ear. And in that moment, Marcus felt something he hadn't let himself feel in a decade. Not sadness, not betrayal, but rage. He tried to fight it at first. He spent more time in the church, arriving early to prepare sermons that now sounded hollow in his own ears. He walked the pews alone before sunrise, whispering to God like he used to. But God was quiet now. The stillness, once comforting, now felt like abandonment. He opened his Bible one morning to Psalm 37. Do not fret because of evildoers. Trust in the Lord and do good. He closed it again without finishing the verse. There had been a time when those words would have steadied him. Now they just felt like noise. Empty promises from a God who had let him rot in silence while his wife built a paradise with someone else. Marcus kept digging. Allison, or Aria, as she now called herself, had a blog attached to the cafe's website. He read every post, every smiling recipe, every glowing paragraph about freedom, reclaiming identity, and letting go of toxic expectations. One entry, dated exactly 2 years after her disappearance, made his hands tremble. I used to live in a world built for everyone but me. I was a wife, a mother, a pastor's shadow. I smiled on cue and suffocated slowly. Until I left. Until I became Aria. She'd signed it with a sun emoji. Marcus reread that line until it felt like a burn across his chest. A pastor's shadow. That's all she'd ever seen him as. Not a husband. Not the father of her children. Not the man who held her through postpartum depression or who carried her when she broke her ankle hiking in Tennessee. No, he was a shadow. A prop in the life she wanted to flee. And yet, some dark part of him still wanted to understand. He called her sister, Rachel, for the first time in years. They hadn't spoken since Allison disappeared. Rachel had moved to Oregon, started a new life, kept her distance from the media circus that followed the case back in 2012. When she picked up, her voice was cautious. Marcus. Hi, Rachel. I just need to ask you something. He didn't mention Mexico. He didn't mention Diego. He just asked quietly if Allison had ever said anything at all before the trip to Florida. Any signs, any doubt, any fear. Rachel was quiet for a long time. Then she said something Marcus would never forget. A few months before she vanished, she told me she felt like she was disappearing even while she was still there. She said she didn't know how to breathe anymore without being told how. Marcus said thank you and hung up. He stared at the floor for almost an hour. How could someone who had been held, loved, prayed over every night, feel invisible? That night, he opened his old prayer journal, the one he'd used the year Allison vanished. He hadn't written in it in years. Most of the entries were simple. Give me strength for the kids. Let her be alive, Lord. Help me forgive whoever took her. But the last page was different. There was no prayer, just a single line, underlined in red. If you won't answer me, I will find the answer myself. He didn't remember writing it. But there was angry, final sharp. And for the first time, Marcus didn't feel like a pastor. He felt like a man who had waited, who had served, who had begged God for peace, and gotten silence in return. At the end of the week, Marcus stood in front of his congregation and gave what many would later call the most hauntingly calm sermon of his life. He spoke about deception, about wolves in sheep's clothing. He quoted Luke 12, verse 2. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. He said sometimes justice doesn't come from the heavens. Sometimes it walks among us in plain clothes, with a purpose. And then he closed his Bible and stepped down from the pulpit without saying amen. The following morning, he submitted a request for leave. He told the church elders he needed a time of spiritual retreat abroad. They nodded solemnly. He was, after all, a good man, a devoted shepherd, a man who had endured more loss than most could bear. They hugged him. They prayed over him. And no one, not one of them, could see the storm building behind his eyes. The plane touched down in Cancun just after 10 a.m. Marcus stepped off wearing a white linen shirt, beige pants, and sunglasses that masked the storm behind his eyes. To anyone watching, he looked like every other American retiree escaping the southern summer heat for ocean breezes and mango cocktails. But inside, Marcus Dawson wasn't on vacation. He was on a mission. He'd told his church he needed time away to reconnect with God's creation. A spiritual sabbatical. A chance to clear his head. No one questioned it. After all, he was still grieving, still healing, still trying to find peace after a decade of loss. What they didn't know was that Marcus had booked a room at a small, nondescript guest house just 5 blocks from a beachfront cafe called Sol y Sal, Sun and Salt. It was owned by Diego Ramirez and Aria Stone. Aria. He'd said her name so many times in prayer that now it sounded like a curse. He spent the first 2 days walking the neighborhood, learning the rhythm of their lives. They opened the cafe at 7:30 each morning. Diego handled the counter, charming the tourists with his accent and easy smile. Allison, Aria, worked in the kitchen and occasionally served tables. She moved freely, barefoot in sandals, laughing with sunburned guests who had no idea she had 2 children in Georgia who still lit candles on her birthday. In the afternoons, they closed for siesta. Diego would nap in the hammock. Aria often went to the open-air market down the street, humming softly as she carried fresh herbs in a woven basket. At night, they'd sit by the water, legs tangled together, sipping from the same glass. Marcus watched it all from behind his sunglasses. Recording times, documenting habits, noting patterns. It wasn't just obsession. It was preparation. On the 3rd day, he walked into the cafe. Allison didn't recognize him. Not first. 10 years is a long time. His hair was thinner now, beard grayer, his posture less proud. She glanced at him like she would any other American tourist, smiled politely, and asked, "Para lavar o para comer aquí?" Her voice. That voice. Marcus blinked slowly, then replied in perfect Spanish, "To go." She nodded and turned away to prepare his coffee. He stood there, heart pounding, not with excitement, not with sorrow, with clarity. She hadn't changed her eyes. She hadn't even covered the scar on her neck. She had erased her name, her past, her vows, but she hadn't bothered to forget the face of the man she'd left behind, because she never thought he'd find her. He paid, took the coffee, and left. No confrontation. Not yet. Back in his room, Marcus spread his notes across the bed. Allison's market schedule, Diego's gym visits, their daily routine, security weaknesses around the cafe and their small beachfront apartment. He created a plan the way he used to write sermons, with structure, with intention, with terrifying calm. First, the tools. He visited a local fishing supply store and purchased a fillet knife, sharp, curved, easy to conceal. Then a pharmacy, where he acquired a strong antihistamine in liquid form. Over the counter, but enough to knock someone out cold if mixed in a strong drink. Finally, gloves. Rubber. Disposable. He folded everything into the bottom of his suitcase, hidden beneath a false lining he'd sewn in himself. Just like with the church, nothing flashy, nothing loud. Just efficient. Just clean. Each night, Marcus rehearsed his steps. He'd wait for Diego to return from his evening jog. He always came back sweaty, thirsty, distracted. Marcus would intercept him at the alley entrance behind their apartment. A quick injection of the drug into his water bottle. Easy, if timed right. Once Diego was unconscious, he'd enter the apartment. Allison would be home alone. No children. No cameras. No neighbors within earshot. He would look her in the eye and ask one question. Why? Not for closure. Not for healing. Just to see if she would lie again, right to his face. And then, it would be over. No police. No arrest. No confession. Just justice. Old Testament justice. The kind they never preach about in polite churches anymore. On the fifth night, Marcus sat on the beach, watching their silhouettes through the glow of their apartment window. Diego was massaging Allison's shoulders. She leaned back in him, eyes closed, peaceful, like a woman who had never known pain. Marcus sipped black coffee from a metal thermos. He hadn't slept in 2 days. He thought about Emma's piano recital last year, about Kyle's science fair ribbon, about the empty chair between them every holiday. And suddenly, the rage didn't feel like fire anymore. It felt cold, like the ocean at night. Quiet, still, inevitable. That evening, he opened a blank notepad and began writing a letter. Not to God, to his children. If this letter ever reaches you, it means I failed to disappear quietly. I need you to know your mother was alive. She left us. She chose to forget you. I didn't kill her because I hated her. I killed her because I loved you both more than I loved my own salvation. He folded it neatly, placed it in an envelope marked to be mailed only in the event of my death, and left it inside the drawer of his bedside table. Then he stood up and zipped his bag. It was time. It started to rain just after midnight. A slow, deliberate drizzle at first. The kind of rain that doesn't rush anything, just soaks the world until everything goes quiet. Marcus stood at the edge of the alley behind the apartment, cloaked in the shadows of the palms, watching the back door through the curtain of falling water. His shirt stuck to his back. The handle of a knife inside his jacket pressed cold against his ribs. Diego hadn't returned from his run yet. Perfect. Just as planned. 10 minutes passed. Then he came, sweaty, shirtless, earbuds in, humming to himself as he jogged up the street toward the apartment. He didn't notice Marcus. He didn't notice the gloved hand dropping something into the metal water bottle sitting on the small patio table. He took a long swig, wiped his mouth, and disappeared inside. Marcus waited. 5 minutes. 10. He counted each breath. At minute 12, he moved. The back door wasn't locked. Of course it wasn't. This was paradise. No one expected monsters here. He stepped into the kitchen, the scent of lime and coconut still lingering in the air. The lights were low. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Soft Latin jazz played from a Bluetooth speaker in the living room. He moved past the table, past the framed photos of Diego and Aria posing on mountaintops on paddleboards at wine tastings, like they were the only two people who had ever existed. He found Diego collapsed on the couch, head tilted back, breathing heavy and slow, drugged but alive. The bottle lay on the floor beside him. Then he saw her. Allison. She was in the bedroom doorway, wearing a soft gray robe, her hair damp from a shower, skin glowing in the dim light. She froze when she saw him, just for a moment. And then, Marcus. His name fell out of her mouth like a prayer that had gone unanswered too long. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She stepped back, hand trembling against the doorframe, eyes wide. How? Where are you? Quiet, he said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It was the voice of the man who used to baptize children and bury the dead. Calm, certain, final. She glanced at Diego. What did you do to him? He's not dead. She looked back at him. The fear was there now, but so was something else. Guilt, or maybe relief. I was going to tell you, she whispered. Someday. No, Marcus said. You weren't. He stepped into the bedroom, closed the door behind him. Just the two of them now. No more hiding. No more masks. She reached for a drawer. Maybe instinct, maybe fear, but he was faster. The knife glinted in his hand. Allison stopped moving. You left us, he said. I had to. No, you chose to. I couldn't breathe. You didn't even say goodbye to your children. I thought if I stayed, I'd die. You did die, he said. To them. You're a ghost. A name on a birthday card. A photo in a drawer. You walked out of our lives like we never mattered. Like God never joined us. Her voice cracked. God had nothing to do with it. He stared at her. For a moment, the knife dipped slightly. The thunder outside rumbled like a low growl. "Then neither do I," he said. He moved quickly. There was no scream, just a gasp and the soft sound of feet stumbling against the hardwood as she fell. He didn't stab her again. He didn't need to. One cut, precise, under the collarbone, just left of the heart. He knelt beside her as her breath slowed. She looked at him with something that wasn't fear anymore. It was understanding, or maybe resignation. She whispered, "I was never coming back." And Marcus replied, "I know." He stood slowly, wiped the knife on a towel, and stepped back into the living room. Diego was still unconscious. Marcus moved with the same quiet, methodical energy. He tied a cord around Diego's neck and pulled, tight and steady, until the younger man's body stopped twitching. Then he sat down. For a long time, the rain grew heavier. Outside, the world slept. Inside, it had ended. He didn't leave right away. He opened the windows to let in the ocean air. He moved Allison's body to the couch beside Diego's, arranging them gently, like they were sleeping, like they'd never betrayed anyone. He took a matchbook from the drawer, lit one, and placed it in the kitchen trash bin beneath a paper towel soaked in liquor. The flame began to build. Not fast, not wild, but enough. He walked out the back door, down the alley, and into the night. No one saw him. No one stopped him. The sea did not rise to stop him. The sky did not open. God said nothing. And that silence, it was louder than any scream. Marcus Dawson returned to Georgia on a Tuesday. No one questioned why he didn't come home from Mexico with Tan. No one asked why the spiritual retreat he'd promised to blog about never showed up in photos or words. He told the church he'd gone offline to reflect. They nodded. They smiled. They welcomed him back with casseroles and long hugs and whispers of, "You look lighter, Pastor." If only they knew. He stood in front of the pulpit that Sunday like he always had. The sanctuary smelled of old pews and lemon oil, the air thick with breathless reverence. He opened his Bible to the book of Ecclesiastes and read slowly, his voice clear. There's a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to mourn and a time to dance. He paused longer than usual before the next line. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. He closed the Bible and said nothing else. At home, life returned to routine. Emma was preparing college applications. Kyle was obsessed with basketball. Marcus cooked dinner most nights, cleaned the gutters, fixed the squeaky back door. But inside, he moved like a man underwater, slow, heavy, suspended in a silence no prayer could penetrate. At night, when the house was still, he would sit in Allison's old rocking chair on the porch, his hands folded like in the old days. But he never bowed his head, and he never prayed. Not anymore. Sometimes he'd wake at 3 a.m., covered in sweat, heart racing. He'd dream of the cafe on fire, of Diego gasping, of Allison staring up at him not in fear, but in recognition. Like she had always known he would come for her. Like she had waited for it. One night, he woke to find himself standing in the hallway, clutching her wedding ring in his hand. He had no memory of retrieving it. He locked it away in a drawer, then moved it to the garage, then buried it beneath a stone in the backyard. But it never stopped ringing in his ears. A month later, the news made its way into local headlines. American couple killed in suspected robbery at Mexican Beach Cafe. The article described a break-in, a suspected fire set to destroy evidence. Diego and Aria, American expat and Mexican national, were both found dead. Local police suspected drug-related motives. No suspects were named, no arrests were made, and no one connected Pastor Marcus Dawson, who had quietly renewed his passport and traveled alone, to a brutal double homicide across the border. Why would they? He was the grieving husband, the man of God, the pillar of community. Still, the silence grew heavier. Emma caught him staring blankly at the wall one afternoon. "Dad, you okay?" He blinked, smiled, and said, "Just tired." She didn't push, but her eyes lingered. Kyle had grown quiet too, older than his age. He'd never spoken much about their mother. But one day, unprompted, he asked, "Do you think she would have come back?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He poured himself a glass of water, turned toward the window, and said, She left the day she meant to. That was all. Carl didn't ask again. Some days, Marcus tried to convince himself he'd done the right thing. He told himself that justice had been served, just not by the law. That maybe, in some way, he had preserved his children's dignity. But the lie never settled. He saw in the way Emma flinched when someone raised their voice. In the way Kyle stayed up late staring at the old family photo like it might give him a different answer. They hadn't asked for vengeance. They'd only ever asked for truth. And Marcus had buried both. He preached a sermon one Sunday about Jonah, about the man who ran from God, who ended up in the belly of the whale. He said, "Sometimes the darkness isn't punishment. Sometimes it's the only place quiet enough to hear what we've done." The congregation nodded, moved by his intensity. Some even wept. No one knew he wasn't talking about Jonah. He was talking about himself. He kept the letter he wrote to his children locked in his desk, the one that started with, "If this letter ever reaches you." He read it once a week, just to remember what he'd done, just in case God forgot, just in case one day they asked. But no one ever did. Not yet. And so Marcus kept preaching. He kept loving his children. He kept standing in front of a cross every Sunday, speaking of mercy, all the while wondering if he had finally done something God could not forgive. 2 years passed. The case in Mexico went cold. The cafe was boarded up. Locals whispered about drug cartels and jealous lovers, but there was never an official suspect. The story faded. Just another unsolved tragedy in a tourist town. But in a locked drawer at the back of Pastor Marcus Dawson's study sat a black leather envelope, sealed with wax and labeled in block letters, "To be opened only in the event of my death." No one knew it existed. Not Emma. Not Kyle. Not the elders of the church. Not even Marcus's closest friend, Pastor Reuben, who'd known him since seminary. It was a secret, yes, but also a confession. Inside was a typed letter, single-spaced, written with aching precision. Marcus had reworked it dozens of times. Each version a little less sermon, a little more truth. It began, "Asterisk to whoever opens this. My name is Marcus Elijah Dawson. I was born a son, became a husband, and tried to die a good man. I failed. Asterisk." He wrote not as a pastor, but as a father. He told the story not the way it happened in court records, because there were none, but the way it had played out in his heart. Asterisk. I believe my wife was taken from me. I believe she was dead or suffering. And so I suffered too. For 10 years, I preached hope while choking on despair. I buried my anger under scripture. I fed my children stories of forgiveness while my own soul starved. Asterisk. He described the day he found her photo. The rage. The confusion. The quiet decision. Asterisk. I crossed borders not for justice, but for judgment. I looked her in the eyes, and she didn't see a husband. She saw a ghost. And then, I made her one. Asterisk. No excuses. No pleading. Just the truth. Asterisk. I didn't kill them because I hated them. I killed them because I had nothing left. Because the man who believed in grace had died long before they did. Asterisk. He ended the letter with a simple line. If God is still listening, I accept whatever silence comes next. Marcus never mailed the letter, never gave it to a lawyer, never slipped it into the church files. He just kept it near, like a splinter in the soul, close enough to remind him of who he was and what he'd done. On a late autumn afternoon, Emma found her father sitting alone in the sanctuary. The sun was setting through the stained glass windows, casting gold across the wooden pews. He looked smaller somehow, older. "Dad," she said softly. He turned, slowly, smiled. The same tired smile he always wore in the final hymn. "I'm here," he said. "I know," she whispered. "But are you really?" He didn't answer, just reached over and gently took her hand. They sat in silence. A pastor and his daughter, a man and his reckoning. Marcus lived another 3 years. He never remarried, never stopped preaching, but his sermons grew quieter, more honest. He stopped saying, "God always has a plan." Instead, he said things like, "Sometimes people leave. Sometimes they lie. Sometimes the only miracle is surviving it." And the church still came. Not because they didn't know something was off, but because pain, when spoken out loud by someone who's lived it, can still save you. even if it couldn't save him. When Marcus died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 53, Emma found the letter while packing his things. She read it alone, 3 times. She didn't cry, not right away. But that night, she lit a candle beside her father's old Bible and whispered, "Asterisk, I forgive you, even if he never did. Asterisk." And that's how it ends. No arrest, no trial, just a man who used to preach grace, learning too late that some wounds aren't healed by faith, only by truth. And sometimes, truth comes long after the blood is dried.